And yeah, I just wanted to get started and get right into it. Um, uh, basically, yeah, we have a few open slots for tonight if anyone wants to send over any more games. But those are filling up quickly too. And of course, anything anyone sends in that we don't get to immediately, we're definitely gonna look at sometime in the near future. So feel free to send your games, and yeah, look forward to reviewing them on the stream. This game was sent to us by the white side on this game, so really wide Bov, and I yeah, it's interesting. It starts off with G3 Hungarian opening. I didn't know that's actually what that's called, but it's an interesting flank opening for white. Um, in terms of popularity, I think it's number. It may not even be on this list, really. This one G3. But against it, D5 or E5 are both playable. D5 is the most popular response, probably because bishop to G2 and B5 basically runs into a blocking of this Fion Shadow diagonal. Hey, good morning, Aphelion. How are you? Yes. So basically, I was sort of thinking of like an intuitive reason for why D5 blocks or why D5 is the most popular response. I'm good. Yeah, basically just getting into the morning stream. I basically starting my day off with the stream, and then gonna do homework for my class, and then yeah, and then another stream tonight. So awesome, perfect Sunday. Uh, so yeah, so I was thinking about why D5 is the most popular response to G3, and I think it's just because it blocks off this Fion Shadow diagonal here. So here D4, Knight C6, Bishop G2, and basically the middle of the board is basically blocked off for white. This is sort of an interesting way to play it. This deviates a little bit from the standard, the standard queen's pawn game idea of like c6, knight d7, and rough development for the light squared bishop. Here with c4, it's a little bit tricky to come up with the response for black. So I would be tempted to play c4 here, but let's see what happens. Bishop f5 gets this dark squared bishop developed. I think that's a good plan. And c4 again looks like a pretty tempting move. It is in the opening book, but white and black responds with e6. I guess the most popular move here is knight f3, and basically this is a game in which the center is basically the center is I guess mostly favorable to black. Good quick development for black though. So yeah, so a knight f6, bishop g2, and basically, this is a game that got sent in, but it's a pretty early material win for white. Let's just run through it really quick. Yeah, so basically, I think that knight sacrifice on d4 was premature, but white gets a good tactical win out of this. So. Ultimately, like, it was good execution to maintain the piece advantage. So obviously, I guess I don't know if I have too much in terms of, to add to white. Black played a clearly unsound opening, and then white kind of had a steady, consistent response to it. He followed the fundamental principles of developing all the pieces. He worked for control of the center, and with this material lead that black basically just volunteers, white ends up getting a pretty solid edge. Not too much in terms of too much in terms of improvement, really. I mean, basically just consistent fundamental play is the response to a large material loss in the opening. But anyways, let's take a look at G3 as a general opening, because this is what white played here. White plays a consistent line, bishop G2, and then knight takes d4 obviously takes us out of the opening book. But let's learn this. It's called the King's Fion Shadow opening. The response is 1d5, and d4, knight c6, bishop g2 is one potential line. But let's look at like a more popular line here. Knight f3, knight f6, bishop g2, c6, castles, bishop g4. And basically, I think this is this transposes into an interesting queen's pawn game. Thematically, what to look for here. I guess white's probably going to play d4 or c4. Probably with c6 having already been played, I think d4 is a better way to challenge the center. Just because you don't want to get into those like complicated Queen's Gambit accepted type issues with like c4, pawn takes c4, and then the queen doesn't have the standard discovery there. But anyways, it's pretty interesting, kind of the way that this played out. d3, bn d7, bn d2, e5, e4, pawn takes, bishop c5, and it's basically, it has characteristics of a few different openings, but, the g3 move order is not the defining characteristic of this opening. The defining characteristics of this opening is relatively open game with quick development. Looks a little bit like, I guess, it has some characteristics of like Caro-Kann with a trade on e4, maybe. I don't know. This is interesting with its d-pawn exchanged. There's also an opening where it's cool. Yeah, no, for sure. Interesting. Yeah, that 1g3 move is pretty interesting. I do. Yeah, let's go over it. What type of moves do you normally? Because I think this game, your opponent hung a piece pretty early, so this was definitely helpful to you as white. But here. What type of move did what are your main developing moves in this opening? So maybe we can kind of examine what your opening book is. So like here, knight c6, bishop g2. We're already sort of out of the mainline g3 response. But yeah, so if there's any particular opening line that you'd like to go through here, we can definitely do it. If you like write out like a standard transposition, we have a few free minutes to take a look. So yeah, so d4. So people push e5 or d5. Yeah, that makes sense. Basically you've played a flank opening. That's or e5, knight f6. Yep, those both look good. I was trying to figure out, so in terms of popularity of responses here, knight f6 is pretty popular because it's non-committal, but the most popular is d5. So d5 here, and basically, the e4 square, it makes a play for control of the e4 square, and then in addition to that, if black plays c6, it can be a tough attacking situation for white. Space for like in terms of, we can just do some analysis in the chat, but like in terms of like a Discord, I have a Discord server if anyone's interested in like going over games at a slower point. Not until tonight. If you want to add one for tonight, that is good. Otherwise, everything here is for we have 6 slots filled for this morning. But if you add a game for tonight, I'll get it in at the 6:05 stream. But yeah, no, thank you very much for being interested in sending a game, Justin. Like, please send one over. I'm also not offended if you can't watch the stream live. Everything's recorded, so even if you can't make it to the 6:05 stream, I'll still go through the game and it'll be recorded and you can watch it tomorrow. But yeah, definitely send your game. Yeah, no. Thanks, Justin. No, I'm a little. My main point is that I'd like to get more than 14 days of lessons up there. At this point, Twitch I think cancels them after 14 days, but I wish we could have them last up there forever. But yeah, anyways, yeah, just send the game and I'll put it directly on the analysis list, Justin. Thank you for that. But yeah, so in terms of this game, g3, d5. Yeah. Can you post it? If you post it on the Discord, I'll take a look at the PGN. So here, d4. So d5, d4, knight c6, bishop g2, and basically, this is a game where both sides do best. Having straightforward development here. G3, d4, knight c6. This deviates from the normal queen's pawn game though, because c5 as opposed to c6, as opposed to knight c6. But yeah, so basically you're playing a flank opening, your opponent's playing a center pawn opening, and you decide to challenge in the center with d4. I think this is all pretty reasonable. I think this is a reasonable idea here. Oh yeah, sure. Here, I'll send the Discord invite now. The Discord invite is right here. Yep, here you go. Yeah, thanks for that, Justin. It's a good Discord. If anyone else is here and wants to join it, it's there's a place for submitting games. There's a place for general chat. I am still working on my Discord skills, but it's a good Discord that I think is a good way to reach me. Anyways, knight f6, knight f3. e6, and white's sort of developing, normally with the priority on this bishop on g2. c4 is a way to challenge the center as white. This has some similarities to like the standard queen's pawn, queen's gambit game, except with bishop g2 as an earlier, moves were spent earlier on bishop to g2. Hey, welcome Topo. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Yeah, we're just looking over games for this morning, and we're looking over 1g3 as a playable opening. I think, yeah, this bishop's fianchetto opening. I think, basically development in the center. I think maybe there's a good challenge for c4 here. Maybe bishop to f4. We can spend a little bit more time on the game too, maybe, but I think the most instructive part of this game is the ability to bring up this 1g3 opening. Knight c6, bishop g2, knight takes d4. Let's look at the other alternatives here, because we're still in opening book. If black plays bishop f5 here, the recommended response is knight f3. Knight b4 is an attack that can be generated for black. Knight a3 is the response. In this particular case, basically knight a3 is a reasonable move. It's basically the only defensive move. This type of knight knight to the rim move is generally not ideal. But if it has a good reason for it, specifically to defend the c2 square, it makes sense. So for example, if black plays knight f6 here, potentially you could play c3, knight c6, and then c4. Knight b1, I guess, is the more popular transposition, but if you wanted to, you could open up with an immediate center push. But yeah, c4, knight f3, knight f6, and I think white's got to have a bit of an advantage here. This knight on c6 is going to become more and more of a liability as this game goes forward. This c4 basically limits black's options in terms of ability to defend d5. Here the knight goes to c3, the bishop goes to f4, and white has very healthy development. There's no problems here really for white. I think knight f3. I would be surprised if knight c3 wasn't a very a very reasonable response. Any developing moves here sort of transpose pretty similarly. Knight c3 on the next move is preferred, I guess. Yeah, let's take a look. G3, e5, G3, e5, bishop g2, d5, d4, e4, c4, c6. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's take a look at this opening. This, basically King's Fianchetto. They call it the Regan variation. I didn't know what that was called. But knight to c3, I think is the move. Hey, welcome, Tarash. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate it. Yeah, some slots for tonight if you want to send one. It looks like there's still some slots for tonight. It's interesting. These things go from like having too few games to too many games really quick. But if you guys send some slots for tonight, we will look at those for sure. I'm just checking I have a live Reddit post also asking for games right now. So I just want to make sure I don't take in too many, but I think we're still good. 1 second. Yeah, so basically, I guess, that line. Hey, thank you very much, Tarash fan, for joining the stream, or following. No worries. Yeah, no worries, Tarash. Not a problem. Um, yeah, but yeah, I'll get that game in for tonight, Tarash. Thank you very much for sending it, and thank you, Justin, as well. Um, let's see. Just pulling. I just want to put that into my spreadsheet right now. But yeah. Cool. This opening here is kind of a tricky transposition for white. This is solid. Solid response. It puts a lot of pressure on the white center, and it ultimately adds up to a complicated, basically a complicated response for white here, who's now lost his mobility of his G2 bishop, and black, who has kind of it looks almost like a reverse French pawn structure. Like this is this is basically a French with c3 having been played for white. So here they're looking at knight h3 as the most popular move. That's weird. That's a weird eval. I would go with the more intuitive knight to c3, knight to f6, c takes, and bishop to g5 here. This is the main line. This is the main line for white here. Bob. This is this basically, I think this is challenging. White is a white does have center control and some advantages in the center. Or black does have advantages in the center, but I think with straightforward development is white's best response. Knight c3, knight f6, either c takes d5 is the most popular move, but I actually prefer bishop to g5 here. I think basically this opening here is this allows white to develop quickly. One of the basically one of the more popular, one of the more, basically the fundamental concept in, flank opening is giving your opponent center control and generally less cramped development. And then you trying to undermine with moves like f3 potentially, or a few other options. C4 is a move that undermines black center to a degree. But here you're basically coming up with the choice of, you're coming up with the choice to give your opponent center control. In that context, I think you should aim for the best development. Yeah, I mean, f3, it has to be done carefully because you want to make sure that, the pawn structure doesn't end up too fractured, and the development remains good for white. But especially given that the bishop is already running into this well-supported e4 pawn, there's some problems for white here that make things more difficult. So f3, a well-timed f3, I think, is a good undermining move against this central pawn structure. Knight c3, knight f6, pawn takes, bishop g5, and here f3 becomes a playable move. But it does need to be relatively well timed so that black doesn't launch an aggressive kingside attack. Knight d7, queen b3, h6, bishop f4, and white's development is just generally healthy. F3, either before or after e3, but then knight to e2. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's, but I think especially with this particular game, I think the opening is the primary focus, and I think G3 is kind of an interesting move as a flank opening. It doesn't offer as cramped a position for white as potentially happens in some situations. Flank openings, especially like the modern for black, lead to a spatial disadvantage. Here, white has basically given control of the center, but he does have some space on the queen side that serves as a compensating characteristic. Maybe knight b5, queen to c7. or with a threat on c7 here, could potentially be a good idea for white. Yeah, like I sort of like knight to b5, like so they're proposing like, you know, knight to b6. I would think knight to b5 could potentially offer some value as a play. But here, you know, the space advantage for black is obvious in the center, but not obvious overall on the board. Anyways, very interesting outcome here. Basically, yeah, I think f3 as an undermining move is probably pretty solid, but the focus here should just be on healthy development for white. I think that's probably the best straightforward response to black's big center in the line that you mentioned. So like this one right here, you know, this is sort of an inverted French structure, but it offers some advantages as white, as the extra tempo and the ability to kind of expand the position, particularly on the queen side. But yeah, overall, very interesting, Bob. Thank you very much for sending the game, and I think, yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this. I think it's, you know, it's great to be doing this. But yeah, so I guess I would say pawn takes d5 and queen b3 is probably, you know, that's an opening move and a way to kind of advance this. But anyways, yeah, queen takes d4. And, you know, with this is a pretty straightforward win that white was just able to convert a hung piece. But in any case, thank you very much for sending the game. It gave us a good opportunity to look at 1g3. Please keep sending them. More games out of 1g3 would be kind of interesting. I'd like to see kind of how that that opening structure sort of evolves, and ways that basically, you know, you can come up with good attacks along, you know, along this basically flank opening against center pawn play. I guess it will lead to some interesting transpositions. In this particular case, the line that you mentioned, the French. But please keep sending games, and I'm very excited to see them. Super interesting stuff. All right, cool. So here we have a game from Croc, who was playing white. I guess his username's different here, but here, yeah. So white played. This game's taken from white's position. I haven't seen it before. Bishop e7 is a relatively conservative play for black, relatively unchallenging for white, and overall, yeah, I think things look pretty good. I think basically, you know, white gets a good position, and I don't know exactly how black equalizes, but overall, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much for sharing the game, and yeah, please send another. I'm actually super curious to see the win over a master there. Yeah, it sounds like an awesome game. So yeah, please send it, and we can probably get to it tomorrow. Yeah, so here, knight c3, Hungarian defense. I guess Italian game, Hungarian defense, bishop e7. Bishop e7 is pretty unchallenging for white. You know, bishop, yeah, perfect. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, please send it. So yeah, so bishop c5 and then threats on f2, I think are pretty, you know, are basically pretty good for black. So with bishop e7, there's not nearly as much challenge for center squares. Here, you know, white looks like he's winning. You know, basically knight h7, you know, offers white this long diagonal, potential attacks on h6, potential d4, ability to expand in the center, and overall, I think white's in pretty good shape. Rook e1, bishop g4, and this is an interesting way to play it. This allows a pretty, you know, this will allow a quick attack by white along the g file. But you know, like many types of moves where you're opening up the rook, where you're opening up like the king side to attack your opponent's king side after castling, it's pretty double-edged. You know, white will have to, so the knight plays to g5, and actually bishop takes, and then the queen moves to e2. But this could potentially get dangerous for white actually along this king side. So let's just go back here, because this transposed very quickly into an attack for black. Here we're in a interesting opening position, and bishop e3 is obviously a playable move. It's a straightforward developing move. But this, yeah, this. Hey, thank you very much for the observe, Lau. Yeah. Rook g1, queen takes, and queen takes h6 here. So by this point, black's, basically black has made a few tactical errors. I think maybe rook takes g7, queen takes g7, rook to g1 here. That might be the best. That might be the best alternative. I guess. Yeah, queen takes g1, and now white's attack is a little bit diminished, and probably the best way to follow it up is like knight d5, knight d7. But king g1 here is I think the best. Yeah. King g1, and then basically I think white does have the advantage here. Let's just look at how the actual game turned out. This is a very interesting, pretty volatile game. Rook g6 is not tactically ideal. I think the best tactic was rook takes g7, queen takes g7, rook g1. But it's very interesting. There's an old classic game where there was some like masterpiece move with some very condensed takeable pinned pieces on the defending side's queen side or king side here. So overall, I think this is pretty solid. Rook g6, queen f3. This ended up transposing into a win for white with somewhat suboptimal play by black. But it is wild when you can get the queen on h6 and the rook on g6 and the bishop on c4 and everything's pinned. It's kind of cool looking, for sure. So knight e6, bishop takes e6, and white's up pretty significantly. Yeah, that's Frank Marshall. Interesting. Yeah, that sounds correct. I knew the story and sort of remembered the position, but it's been a long time since I've looked over that stuff. Yeah, there's an awesome game by Frank Marshall. I would check. The gold coin game. If any of you guys is interested in seeing a crazy position that looks sort of like this, there's a gold coin. Gold coin game by Frank Marshall. I'm sure is something that you could Google and look at it. But anyways, this position ends up looking pretty good for black after the attack gets diminished. Let's look. Frank Marshall's the classic player. In one characteristic, he knows he plays some unsound sacrifices, but his wins are just awesome in the way that they're created. Thank you very much for the observe, Jorilano. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, the gold coin game, I would check that one out. Very interesting. But I guess especially after the queen trades here, white's advantage gets less pronounced. Rook f8, rook takes, but yeah, let's see exactly where the eval flips. Here, rook f8 and then rook f1. Seems slow, but we can take a look at it. Knight f1, knight g5, knight d5, and I guess there are going to be some threats potentially with knight to f6, maybe, knight to f3, knight to f6. But this is pretty interesting. White basically has lost his winning attack, and actually his 2.5 pawn advantage is primarily based on his actual 2 pawn advantage. 2.5, and he's up 2 pawns. So I think that white didn't optimize tactically here. The first change that I think I would make is this rook takes g7, queen takes g7, rook g1. Rook g6 is like very much a masterpiece type move, but objectively, this is better. Trading the 2 rooks and opening the king side is definitely worth the queen. No, that's cool. Marshall Chess Club, I think they're trying to reopen it. I don't know. It's an interesting place, very historical. But but yeah, this is interesting. An interesting way that this plays out. Um, so yeah, in terms of the first thing I think in terms of opening examination, White is playing this opening in a very double-edged way. Bishop to g5, rook to g1, and then there's definitely some danger for Black here. Or there's danger for Black, and there's also danger for White. But on rook g6, that basically maximizes the pins. Anyways, this this way of opening up the king side is good, this was overly ambitious. White is showing a 7-point advantage here. The key move here actually is one that's pretty interesting, which is bishop to b3, which maintains the pin, but doesn't doesn't simplify the position. So like a5, I guess, is seen as the best move here, but queen takes g6 is unplayable, and knight to g4 is unplayable as well. Rook takes h6 is probably the best. Rook takes f6 is probably the best option. Knight d4 maybe, but overall it's pretty interesting. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Amirko. But yeah, all of this I think is pretty good. To this point, White has played a good game. This is mainly about tactical execution. Rook g6 was probably overly ambitious, but it allowed for some good opportunities for White after Black makes some misplays. Super interesting, pretty position. It's cool. It's cool when you have this this formation here for sure. But I guess I would say keep yeah, no, I mean, keep this position together, basically. Don't simplify an attacking position with less than winning material if you don't need to. In terms of tactical play, bishop b3 was an improvement. Rook takes g7 early here was an improvement. But very and then avoiding this simplification with bishop to b3. But as from a conceptual perspective, trading off pieces while you're doing an attack tends to be unfavorable to the attacker who's trading off pieces, and good for the defender who's trading off pieces. That's kind of a fundamental takeaway from this. This is a pretty good demonstration of that general principle. So if you're attacking, leave things complicated. If you're defending, try to make things more simple by trading off pieces. Conditional on the idea that there aren't some overriding characteristic that makes that tactically unsound. But that's the general way to handle an attack as defense, is to trade off and continue your attack as White. The defender wants to trade things off, the pieces that he's getting attacked by, and this game basically demonstrates why. These trades were pretty unfavorable to White in general. Yeah, no, I think no, not at all crushed. This one here, I think, no, sorry, you're talking about the other game. But yeah, no, I think this game was pretty solid. White basically had a big lead and then ultimately, had simplified in a position where he shouldn't have simplified. No, not at all, Aphelion, not a problem. But yeah, so this, I guess, is pretty, I don't know, this traded off into a kind of unusual way. But the main instructive point here is that White would have done the best here having left the pieces on the board, and the pieces unfortunately got traded off. By here, White has simplified really significantly, and the plus is much less large than it was. Bishop takes f7, I guess, offers some possibilities for White. Very kind of open kingside for Black, but the main issue I think here was a fundamental one. Simplifying here traded off and lost about 3 or 4 points in the eval. So the fundamental idea is keep your pieces on the board. Otherwise, very pretty. Look at all this. Look at all these pinned pieces. Especially look at this this sort of like square type formation. That's pretty wild. But yeah, White should have kept the pieces on the board to maximize his attacking potential. It's a very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, Troger. Appreciate it. Yeah, Crocky. Thank you for sending that game. Very cool. Okay, so this is another game to us, sent from the white side's perspective. Oh, it looks like there's some corruption on this game. Interesting. Um, huh. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like that game was not that game is not sent. This D1 game. So we'll skip back to it and circle back later. We might have some extra time. But this game was sent to us by the Real, and let's look. Cool. C5, knight c6. This is a pretty interesting open Sicilian. D6, bishop e3, knight f6. We're really in the mainline Sicilian here. This is the Real game, to confirm. So yeah, bishop b5 is one of the options here. The main move here is, which is kind of surprising, is this bishop c4 in the Schwenningen Sicilian. Bishop c4 is a complicated move to be played in the Sicilian. It runs into this pawn on e6, and the diagonal is not really large or ability to change much in for the bishop on c4. I guess the bishop c4 here is meant to support against d5. Basically on d5, that bishop's diagonal is not nearly as blocked off as it is with multiple pawns on the a2 g8 diagonal. But in any case, bishop c4 looks pretty solid. Bishop e7, queen to e2, a6, castles queenside, and we're still very much in. Basically, this is a main Schwenningen Sicilian opening line. White has healthy development, but black is likely to get into this this issue on the queen side. Basically queenside king safety issues potentially. The natural play for black in the Sicilian is to the queen side. So if the king is castled queenside, this offers direct attacking chances on the black king. So like b5, rook b8. We had an interesting game yesterday where we were looking at the analysis value of rook b8 versus rook c8. Rook b8 attacks this b2 pawn more directly than rook c8 attacks the king. There's more pieces on the c file. This rook b8 move, has the potential to be problematic for this pawn on b2. Anyways, after castling queenside, it's pretty close to equality and a very mainline Sicilian line. Here instead, black plays a less, less of a book move. If you look at the book move, this is only a 5-game move versus many more for bishop to c4 or bishop to e2. Bishop b5 is sort of an unusual diagonal for the black bishop. I guess I would say that this diagonal is more of a problem for the black bishop, or for the light squared bishop, because he doesn't want to trade for the black knight on c6. A trade for the knight on c6, basically improves black's position. It forces white to give up his bishop pair, right? So if he plays like bishop takes c6, black will retake with c6 and then have a direct open file for his rook on b8, almost a fully open file. And just in general, trading off the bishop pair in the Sicilian like this is not thematically that great. Bishop takes c6 is not, trading in c6 broadly is probably not the best idea for white in the Sicilian. Usually trades on c6 are helpful. They sort of help black construct a strong pawn structure in the center, like with all these pawns and with a d5 push coming. Rook b8 becomes valuable against the bishop on b5. One of the advantages for black in the Sicilian is having the rook on the c file. Even better than the c file actually is the b file for the rook. It offers a direct attacking line from the rook on b8 to the pawn on b2. If you're looking at a semi-open file, the one on the b file is actually longer for black in most of the Sicilian games. So this simplification I don't think is favorable to white. By the time this happens, and this is what happens in the game, the eval shifts towards equality or slightly better for black. This rook on the b file is an advantage, like an asymmetrical advantage that will really benefit black. So yeah, so in terms of instructional ideas, here you've played a mainline Sicilian, great, but you play bishop b5 with the idea of trading off on c6, and I guess I would argue that the trade on c6 in general, needs some type of very material compensation to be worthwhile for white. Overall, it improves black's pawn structure. It has this. Yeah, I did. I played the Indiana State Chess Championship. Thank you for asking, Jor. I didn't win. It was a good tournament, but I had a good time, and that was all good. Bishop to b5 is a but yeah, bishop to b5 is not the correct diagonal for the bishop here. This is one of the surprising positions where bishop c4 is a more playable move. Bishop e2 is also good. But either way, these bishop moves, it is correct to develop the bishop here, but I don't think as a general policy it's correct to be trading on c6. Those c6 trades in general, yeah, it was interesting, Jor. He played a good game. He's a good player, and I had some interesting. It was an interesting opening. He played a very early queen, a queen move, yeah, he played well, and I didn't win the tournament. I was a little frustrated. I mean, not frustrated, but it was kind of a bummer because even if I'd won that last round game, I wouldn't have won the tournament. The other guy finished with 4.5. So overall, very good tournament. I had a good time. Interesting trip. But yeah, so trading on c6 here, I think is nothing too great. After this simplification, black's showing equality or better. Largely because this open queenside favors black, as is common in the Sicilian. So taking this back a second, I would be more reluctant to trade on c6. There aren't that many opening lines. I don't think there's anything too great there, but no, I mean I don't remember, but yeah, it was a fun tournament. It was a good tournament to play. But yeah, so this basically trades off into relative equality for a relatively equal position, but with black having more chances. It's interesting. I don't know what the best option here is for white. I guess probably to continue to try to make moves, developing in a normal way. But now white's sort of relinquished the advantage. One of the theoretical concepts is playing white kingside advances against black queenside advances. That's one of the main themes in the Sicilian. But overall, I think this white kingside attack is pretty strong. In a general principle in the Sicilian, and the fact that white can't do it in this situation, or white is very slow to do it in this situation, is problematic for black. So here, castles, bishop e7, bishop g5, h6. Yeah, overall, I guess I would say this simplification is not particularly good for white, but I don't really know what white's options are. Bishop takes c6 was overly simplifying here, and just as a frame of reference, the opening theory here strongly weights towards bishop c4, bishop e2, or even potentially f4, which is a different strategy, kind of expanding in the center, turning it more into kind of a Grand Prix type structure. But here, this position is equality with an easier position to play for black. Black has a better center. Black has the ability to play on the b file with his rook. Overall, kind of, yeah, I don't know. In terms of generating, in terms of coming up with a plan to generate for white, It would take me a while to kind of slow down and come up with an idea. Maybe the d6 pawn is vulnerable. Maybe. Like b3, is sort of an immediate required response, or rook b1 is sort of an immediate required response. But with queen d3 and like e rook d1 and then attacks on the d6 pawn, maybe that could provide a point of vulnerability. But it's not super easy to come up with a plan for white here. A6, e5 is an immediate challenge. I don't think e5 is correct. I think e5 is kind of like, it's too early for it. And also, once these pawns trade off, is this really better for white? White's rook improves, but white has no center anymore. I think if white holds on to this e4 pawn, he'll have more chances in order to in order to try to hold the center. Black may simplify with d5, but I think e5 is better saved for a for a response to d5 as opposed to playing it immediately. Playing it immediately just sort of neutralizes the position in the center, and then black's just left with better piece play. So I would hold off on e5. The engine suggests bishop to g3. I guess refocusing on this weak pawn that I was talking about and potentially adding some pressure on that pawn by adding this pin on rook b8. I think in terms of other moves here, I don't know. I guess I'm sort of looking at a3 or b3, maybe b3 and then knight a4. But plans are difficult to come by for white. I mean, you're almost in the situation where you have to see kind of black's plan and black's tactical execution. It's hard to force anything. White's basically lost the initiative. Black's the one who's forming the plans here. Anyways, it's very interesting, and I think after all this, basically, black unfortunately has equalized. So yeah, here I guess black loses some material. Black just seems this is a tactical win for white, right? Rook takes a6, free pawn, knight to c3, and then but basically white has gotten a connected passed pawn here for basically no compensation. This tactical combination ended up playing out pretty well for white. And then once black's chances are somewhat diminished, white's heading into a better queenside pawn structure in the endgame, and basically can cement a win based off of the advancement of the b3 pawn. Overall, very interesting. The main points that I would look at are this. I think the tactical play, actually on the queen side here, with the rook, once this gets extended, is good, and won a game that was pretty close to equality. But the issue here is, I think this is a line in the Sicilian, which offers way better chances and way better initiative to black. I would avoid this if possible. This is overly, this open file for the rook allows many opportunities to make the game about black's strength on the queen side. But yeah, overall this looks pretty good. The game was played pretty well, and ended up being a win for white. But the improvement that I would advocate here is try being less interested in bishop to b5 in the Sicilian, unless it's part of well-established opening theory. Bishop to e2 is probably what I would play. Bishop to c4 is the book line, the book Sicilian line. But trades on c6 generally tend to favor black in the Sicilian, unless there's a really specific reason to do it. There's no reason to give black the open rook file in the Sicilian, facing towards b2. That trade just tends to strengthen the rook file, make it an open file for the rook on b8, and also increase the strength of black's center here. So anyways, it's very interesting. That was a good way to that you maximized on a relatively equal game with relatively few chances for white. But instructively, examine trades on c6 in the Sicilian, because they're often equalizing and not particularly good for white. So that opening theory is where I would sort of point you towards. But yeah, thank you very much for sending that game in, the real. Really, yeah, good opportunity to get a little bit more into the weeds on, deeper Sicilian opening theory, and overall, pretty interesting. Thank you very much for that. So let's take a look at the next one. This is Hans Joe's game, and he I haven't seen it yet, but he had some notes on it himself. So yeah, always feel free to send notes on your games. They're usually pretty interesting, and I would say they're almost always helpful in terms of analysis and focus. Yeah, no, Tarash, I guess we can do your game this stream. One of the games that I wanted to show this stream was Corrupted, so so I guess we can take a look at your game this stream if just since there's a slot open. Yeah, we can do that. I'll try to go back and try to figure out how to fix that corruption, but yeah, unfortunately, one of the game's slots didn't. It wasn't a retrievable game from chess.com. But yeah, let's get yours in. Let's get yours in at the end of the stream, Tarash. Yeah. So here, this is a game played by white. It's basically white as playing e4 against a flank opening. This has some characteristics, I guess. It's basically a modern Pyrrhic. Black's kingside gets a little bit more loose with h6. And overall, I guess, threats on f6, g5. Wolfgang was focused on queen c2 as a blunder. Let's see if first let's see if the eval actually agrees with that. Or maybe he's referring to a different queen c2. I want to make sure that I follow his note on this. Yeah, so queen c2 seems to be a queen c2 is played in the opening. I'm not sure it's a blunder. All right, so the pre queen c2 eval is plus 0.8, and queen c2 steers it a bit towards equality, I guess, but still 0.2. I don't see any problem with it, really. It's an interesting question. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't call it a blunder. Certainly, maybe they're proposing a different a different move here, but positionally speaking, I don't really see a problem. I'll try to focus less on the eval. I guess the eval goes from 1.4 to 0.3. Weird. I guess, I don't know. The engine seems to like this e5 line, so let's take a look at the e5 line and what the improvement there might have been. This does allow white to orient an attack towards the king side. But queen c2, I think, has some value in that it orients pieces towards the queen side as well. I mean, it basically sets up the the queen behind the bishop in order to try to undermine the g6 square. On queen g6, I guess f5 isn't played. I guess what I would say here is probably the error relating to queen c2. Basically is aligning another piece behind a a diagonal that's blocked. This is not particularly good for white. Here, yeah, I mean, basically, the bishop is already kind of fighting against this e4 blockage. So adding the queen there doesn't really add much. I guess I wouldn't say it's particularly bad or it's a particularly large misplacement of the queen, but black's going to close this diagonal. So aligning the queen along a closed diagonal is sort of an inefficient move. Blunder, I think, is an aggressive way to phrase it, but I think there are potentially moves here for white that are more productive. The computer suggesting e5, that's ambitious. That's probably a move that's not going to be basically that's a move that requires a lot of tactical foresight. It's a long move to be calculating on the fly on the stream. That's what the engine suggests. I'm going to look at knight c4 for a more fundamental perspective. Knight c4 basically develops the knight to an outpost where it looks pretty strong. d5, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, knight e5 moves it to a different outpost where it's pretty strong. But overall, yeah, knight c4 I think is a line that looks pretty pretty playable for white. It's more of a development. It's more of a development with a transparent reason for being played. This knight becomes much more mobile on c4 as opposed to d2. This knight doesn't really have anywhere to go to progress. So moving the knight to c4, does allow it to have a more well-established, clear route forward. Basically the engine I think is aiming for a purposeful move as white here, and queen c2 after this diagonal is blocked by e5. This e4 pawn is stuck there. Is probably characterizes as a more as a move that's not as purposeful. So here, I don't know, maybe queen e2 potentially. At least with these lines of diagonal, you have the idea of moving the queen to the king side. I think white should try to mobilize pieces towards the king side. But queen c2 is not a very efficient way to do it. Knight c4, knight e3, maybe, with a d5 push. But the purposefulness of the move is kind of undermined by e5 here. So that's why I think the eval moves against you, and I wouldn't call it a blunder. I would just call it mostly a tempo and a non-improving move. This is a situation, particularly when there are, potential attacking chances on the king side, that a purposeful move is really one that has the most value. So I'm thinking knight c4. Engine suggests e5 with tactical play. That looks complicated. I'm not comfortable. I guess let's go through it, but not comfortable, advocating that when I haven't seen the full tactical conclusion of it. Maybe pawn takes f6. Yeah, overall here, I think, this is a very simplified position. Black's king side is open. Black looks, the position in the center is definitely very complicated. There's diagonals. There's this bishop offering force in reverse along this diagonal. It's really tricky. So I'm not comfortable advocating e5 without spending half an hour thinking about it. But from a fundamental perspective, queen c2 is not purposeful, and that's why that move has has shortcomings. Knight c4 improves the knight's position. It's a fundamentally correct move. That's why queen c2 or knight c4 is at least an improvement over queen c2. Nothing wrong with queen c2. Just yeah. Overall, I think there may be better options for white here, which is why the engine deems it to be a less valuable move. But even after it, the engine is still close to equality, or maybe even slightly better for white. I'm not sure queen c2 is the move where the eval deteriorates. I actually think it's a little bit further on here. Knight f5. Here there's another kind of big shift in the eval. Knight f5 looks like it. Does this hang a pawn, or it gets close? With knight f5, this line hangs a pawn. So bishop takes, pawn takes, knight e7, and this f5 pawn, which could have been very valuable as an attacking resource, is lost. F6 is the best alternative, but the queen c2 I don't think was the error here. Queen c2 was inefficient, but we all make inefficient moves. Every grandmasters make inefficient moves or slightly inefficient moves. This knight f5 move I think is more of a tangible error. This loses the pawn. Ends up being the e4 pawn turning into the f5 pawn, but that pawn ends up getting lost for white. So I guess counting out the maneuverability here. Knight g4 is tempting because it's a counter to this knight on f4. Knight f5 here is tempting because it's a counter to the f4 knight. But overall, I think you probably the engine is advocating like moving the rook or doing something that's significantly more conservative than that. If you just it's better to play a non-advancing move than a move that loses a pawn. Ideally, you'll find a move that doesn't do either. Here, the engine is advocating c4 and c5 push. Basically the idea is that you're pretty locked up on the king side, so you might as well try to get like an opposite flank or center attack to try to direct some resources towards the center as opposed to the king side. But at the end of the day, here, basically this loses a pawn, so we know that it's not that. That's what I would point to as the blunder for this game, not queen c2. Queen c2 was inefficient, but the real eval shift came with knight f5 and bishop takes f5 and the knight bringing another attacker on the f5 pawn. Overall, very interesting game. Thank you very much, Hans-Joe, Wolfgang, for sending me that game. Please keep sending them. Super helpful this morning. Really an interesting game. But queen c2 is one focus, but the knight f5 I think was a more decisive error there. Overall, really interesting. Thank you very much for sending it. Cool. On to the next one. Let's take a look. Cool. Another Vienna game. Vienna game is interesting. Before I really get into the aspects of the Vienna game, I want to show everyone something that we've sort of looked at on the stream and was instructive for me. Here, so this is the straightforward Vienna game, right? Knight to e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4. This is a Falkbeer Gambit Vienna game. There's actually a very well-defined break between the best and second best moves for black here. This is something that we discovered. But there's multiple lines here, and one is very clearly the best for black, and yet doesn't always get played. So if you're ever playing the black side against the Vienna Gambit or against the Falkbeer Gambit in the Vienna game, the really only playable move for black here is d5. You can see it's like a 90% option. So it is known that it's objectively the best, but it's objectively the best by like 0.7 pawns, almost a pawn. D5 is the move. Anything else leads to an advantage for white, a lasting advantage for white. The refutation is pretty objectively d5 here. Other moves are not very good for black. So for anyone watching this and learning this opening, and if you ever face the black side of it, it's 3d5. It's not pawn takes pawn, and it's not anything else. It's objectively d5 here. This is an example of a game where that doesn't happen. Pawn takes f4, and white's showing an almost one pawn advantage. There's still a few different options here. Bishop c4 is one. E5 is probably. I would lean towards the more conservative knight e3 or knight f3, but here, white basically establishes an early lasting advantage. There's some tactical complexity here. Bishop e2 is an error. Queen e2 is better. Queen e2 is better than bishop e2. White's able to hold on to this pawn, and white's positional advantage is not clear after giving back basically now white has sacrificed two pawns. and doesn't have an obviously better position. So black, black shows an advantage here. The correct move is queen e2, defending the e5 pawn. Knight f3. I vote knight f3 for white out of this position. It's straightforward. It's developing. It's probably pretty easy to play as white. E5 adds a whole layer of complexity to the mix that ends up resulting in a two-pawn black advantage here. So I would say this is probably this is weaker for black. Weaker for white. From not from this point, but from this point here. This gets really tactical. Black showing a 1.4 edge. Knight takes d4 was not correct. Black can play queen d6 and be pretty safe. Try to get a more conservative situation. Yeah, knight takes d4, not really that great, to be honest. It hangs the knight. There's the trade of two pieces for a rook, which is unfavorable to black. White shows a big eval advantage after. So yeah, here it's very tactical. The most instructional thing, the very early instructional thing takeaway from this, playing black against this opening, d5 is the move, very objectively. We've gone through this at length in previous stream, but there's no other move for black that's really that acceptable. d5 is what black should play here as the refutation to this Vienna gambit. Queen e2, a tactical change basically. This black f4 pawn will probably fall at some point, but queen e2 secures a lasting advantage for white. White should come out of pawn takes f4 with a lasting advantage, as our previous analysis has shown. So here, queen e2, knight f3, and then this trade was kind of not the greatest concept for black. White ends up solidifying a solid advantage here, and winning a rook and pawn endgame is the way that he chose to transpose it down. In terms of analysis here, it's a very tactical game. Black is proactive in making sure that basically black is proactive in making sure that he establishes a tactical situation, but the tactics aren't necessarily that great. The one improvement, to this point, basically, I would say a slight improvement is probably knight f3 or the more common bishop c4. Those two together are 90% of this theory, more 95% of this theory. So e5 is not the right play for white. The right play here is knight f3 or bishop c4. Knight f3 is the second most popular move. I choose that because it's conservative and it doesn't really expand the it basically doesn't really expand the attacking chances for black. E5 is just a very double-edged move to play in a position. If you're the white player in the Vienna gambit, anything other than d5 should make you pretty happy here. So from this position, I would argue that you should know the next, the follow-up moves, because you've secured an advantage with black's acceptance of this, of this gambit. So here, I guess I would say, there are two things here. So it was very tactical. So I don't think I can offer much in terms of improvement on the engine. The engine is tactically better than everybody. So engine-related tactical review is the best for tactical games. I can offer things, and I can determine that a particular tactic was cool or pretty, but the main thing about tactical games is that engine analysis beats human analysis for almost anything. humans can add value on the strategic side. So giving strategic advice, I think, is, this game is mostly tactical, and an engine does better tactics than I do, and almost anybody does. So from this point, the calculating out this central tactic, I'm just going to be reading out engine output basically. Cool tactic, but obviously black makes a miscalculation and white plays it correctly, so it's a win there. What I can offer is, yeah, it is. No, for sure, it's definitely a cool game. This two sack, this 2-piece sack for the rook is an interesting way for black to play it. But basically the game is decided after this tactical this tactical error by black, this overambitious combination. So I guess what I can offer you in terms of analysis is, this opening is this opening is something we've gone over before, and it's interesting. The only playable move for black is d5. Anything else is a game that white should have a solid initiative in. D5, D5 is not, D5 is the correct play. Anything else, you're in good place as white. And then the most concrete takeaway is, okay, in this particular variation of this particular opening, you've secured a potential initiative, an advantage for white that should be, somewhat lasting. How do you respond to it? And it's either knight f3 or bishop c4. I'm gonna make a judgment call and steer away from e5, because I think that this is unclear and probably tactically too too double-edged for black. It's a much easier game to play, knight f3 or bishop c4, particularly at a level where tactics are more double-edged than they might otherwise be. So I'm gonna say knight f3 over e5 here. It's up to you. It's a stylistic thing, and e5 does has some games in the opening book, but I know that knight f3 gives you an easier game to play. Hey, thank you very much for the observe contingency. Appreciate it. So e5, queen e7, and knight f3 here. Looks good. So I'll say knight f3 over e5, bishop c4 over e5, but it's your opening. So if you're comfortable playing a more double-edged thing, hey, thank you for the highlighted message, Dennis. Thank you for joining the stream. With neither of those getting played, and let's say you go into the situation where you say, okay, I know e5 is more double-edged, but it offers some interesting attacking chances, and it still shows a positive white eval. I would say, that's a choice, and it makes, it makes sense. Like, you can definitely, play it, and the percentage is actually pretty good for white, but I think this is too dangerous to play unless you really feel comfortable with the tactics here. On queen e7, we've now gone into the situation where you're still playing e5 as opposed to knight f3 or bishop c4. On queen e7, hold on to this pawn. Your positional advantage is not clear enough to justify a two-pawn sacrifice. So here, queen e2 defending this e5 pawn. I'm also sort of curious about knight to f3, but the main point, or d4, I guess, also defends the pawn. But the main point here is that one pawn gambit here leads to a good position after d5 isn't played, but giving up the second pawn really creates a problem. For anyone who's new to the chat, Jen is my girlfriend. She helps out a lot with these and a lot of the administrative stuff that I'm not particularly good at. If there's that's a good idea. If there's anything that anyone wants in terms of channel points, we can definitely try to make things more fun. I appreciate you guys being here, and I appreciate you guys accumulating channel points. So giving options for channel point redemption, just let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see or anything in particular. That's an idea. Maybe that is an idea. we'll come up with some ideas. Maybe emojis or something like that. You know, my hope is that eventually we'll get a lot more games for analysis than might otherwise be available. You know, I guess you know, at that point maybe we can use because I maybe we can use channel points as like a priority thing. Maybe that's just an idea that I'm thinking about. I don't know what you guys think, but I feel like channel points for game analysis seems like a fair trade that keeps the channel free, but offers a yeah. All right. Silly hat as a redemption for channel points is an idea that we will put under review. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, thank you very much for this game. It offers an interesting opportunity to look at this. You know, it offers an opportunity for us to examine this Vienna Gambit theory. But yeah, I also should learn the raid. I don't really know that super well. But yeah. Anyways, this overall turns into a win for white. But yeah, move 3 is very well established as what's the best for black. Yeah. Anyways, after that, you know, white's in pretty good shape after this over ambitious combination. Yeah. Interesting idea. Cool. Yeah, so I guess my last game was corrupted. If you guys can point towards you know, which game this was. I couldn't seem to find it, but if this matches a link that anyone else you know, sends in or knows exactly which game this is, give me a second and I'll take a look and see. I'm sort of curious if I can. I want to find it. Obviously, I want to do the review of the game, but that link seems to not work. Yeah, cool. Thanks. I think it is. I think maybe it is Aphelion. Let's take a look. No, yeah, no worries. Let me try again. I also said I would get Tarashin just as a follow up. Cool. Let me pull it. Thank you very much for saying something, Aphelion. I want to get to it for sure. So sorry, it's my bad for pulling the wrong one. Let me get that right now. Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. No problem at all. No. Let's do this for sure. I'll make but I'll close the stream on Tarash's game. So thank you all very much for sending it in, and glad we were able to quickly solve that. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Aphelion. I appreciate it. Yeah, so here, e4, e6, d5. Let's look at this. Aphelion is playing white here, and I'm pretty curious about this. Sorry, I'll put it in analysis mode. Wow, yeah, very solid game for Aphelion, though. Cool. French defense with exchange. Not an opening that I know super well. We had an interesting game, you know, out of this theory yesterday. And I think we came to the conclusion that the correct move here is knight c3. But either way, yeah. So maybe e5 or knight c3. Pawn takes d4. I think makes things too simple. You know, this position leans towards symmetry. So on d5, pawn takes d5. This is yeah. Oh, that's actually really interesting. But yeah, so pawn takes d5 is actually not the move here. You know, we were looking at it at a similar position. Out of it was actually yesterday. It was e4, c6, knight c3, d5, and we were looking at a similar position. And it was pretty clear out of the Caro-Kann, especially, that that pawn takes was not the correct response. It was either knight c3 or e5. But this kind of oversimplification, unless white is playing for a more drawish type idea, sort of neutralizes white's initiative. This position is very symmetrical. Um, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome, Aphelion. Um, Bishop d3, knight c6, castles. Uh, Interesting. Um, yeah, cool. So here, yeah, this looks like a pretty good win for white. Um, but um, but yeah, let's look. Um, Bishop d3, knight c6, and then castles, bishop g4, c3, h6, bishop f4. White's significantly better here. This exchange, I guess it's an established line, but this will lead to White's advantage not being greater than equality. That said, the French exchange is a very playable opening. That's just what this is. This transposed into the French exchange. Bishop d3, knight c6, castles, bishop g4, c3, and overall here, pretty much, very, I guess, draw focused, but also one that's not going to offer black many chances. Yeah, no, I mean, the exchange French is an interesting line. I've played it over the board. I played over the board. I definitely played over the board sometimes if I have a good reason. If I believe my opponent has a very strong French, book knowledge, I will play the French exchange, knowing that will lead me towards towards equality and minimize black's chances of winning. If I need a draw in a situation, I occasionally I get draw games I'd like to draw against IMs or that kind of thing. I will be willing to play the French exchange. Given that you've set up a drawish position for yourself, the French exchange allows for you to basically play as aggressively as you'd like. It's basically a pretty good, it's a good opening to attack out of, knowing that the chances that you lose are relatively low. It looks here like White gets a pretty solid edge. Is knight e5 a tactical win here? Yeah, knight e5. Okay, so knight e5 does generate a big tactic. A trades on e5 will make White's attack on the king side pretty monstrous, very hard for black to defend against. So knight e5 here, fx takes. Yeah, no, totally. This looks pretty good. F4 and then knight e5. Yeah, I mean, White really has a huge positional edge, not a material edge. Just these pieces are oriented towards this king side, and this king side's going to be completely vulnerable. So, yeah, I guess c3, bishop f4. Yeah, it's an awesome game. I mean, this does get very, this position here really is, a situation in which you're going to have many different types of ability to attack black aggressively, the engine's evaluating that one of them will work. How do you advance this game? Maybe rook f3, rook, f rook e f1. Yeah, no. So I mean, black basically is already in pretty serious trouble. This king side is under resourced in terms of developing pieces. But here, this offers White some good chances. Basically, if White can launch a quick attack here, and I think rook f3, rook f1 is probably the way to do it. This king side is definitely going to break. So yeah. Overall, I think this is a good way to play it. Let's go back a little bit just to see how black has misstepped here to allow this kind of opportunity. I think, yeah, Queen e1. Well, I like Queen e1 here actually. Queen e1 is a pretty thoughtful move if you think about it. It does resolve this pin on f3, and it basically sets up knight e5. Yeah, so I really like this. I like this first knight e5 actually. The fact that you can fix both the pin on your queen and the threat on to double your pawns on the bishop file is valuable. This looks good, and by this point, White has basically started a big attack. I'm wondering if if Black had any better opportunities to defend here. Yeah, knight e5 is just too advantageous for White. Knight e4 is the suggested move. I guess knight e4 basically allows for an exchange. This basically shuts down White's more powerful light squared bishop. Attacks on h7 are going to become less possible here. So on knight e4, bishop takes, and then maybe f5. This turning this into a connected passed pawn would be a good chance for Black at least. Knight g4 allowing knight e5 will transpose into a pretty unfavorable position. For White, or an unfavorable position for Black. But I guess an improvement to look at for Black would be like knight to e4. Queen e6 also looks playable. Gonna try to figure that one out. But yeah, knight e5 here. Then what happens? I guess this makes that attack less. Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess one of the key parts of knight e5 as a tactic is that it basically forces White to trade here. Without this knight on g4, knight e5 isn't a prompting move. With knight e5, basically, the queen can't move to e6 because there's a threat. There's a double threat on the knight on g4. So here, this looks pretty good for White. But yeah, I guess I would argue that knight g4 sort of plays into the strength of White's knight e5 here. Knight e5 is still a great tactic because it determines that this position here is just very winning for White, as a move. Or basically, it's a very winning position for White. This kingside is gonna be under some really severe pressure, and Black's not gonna have the pieces required to block that pressure. But here, moves that aren't knight g4 provide a somewhat better defensive resource provide a somewhat defensive resource for White, or for Black. Sorry. But after knight g4 and the forced trade on e5, it's pretty much over. This is a huge space advantage, huge central advantage, and the king side's gonna collapse. So yeah. Anyways, it's interesting. Yeah. Thank you. No. Thank you. This is an awesome tactical demonstration. Knight e5 was a great move and a great find, and you deserve to win the game for finding that. There were better ways for Black to have played it proactively, but once that happened, it was a really good catch and a good tactical win. So yeah, pretty awesome. So here, yeah, I mean the move that I actually, one of the moves that I like the most here, from a conceptual perspective, is Queen e1. But everything was pretty strong, and you were able to turn what is a very drawish game into a very clear win by move 16. Yeah, no, of course, no. Thank you very much for sending the game, and a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, this does show how extreme a positional advantage can get. This kingside attack, which is several moves away. is already predetermined to be a great strategy as for white against d5. Yeah, sure. No, we'll take a look at yours in a minute, Tarash. But overall, yeah, this is a great win, great, very interesting one for Aphelion. So thank you very much for showing this. Yeah, that's an awesome kingside attack. Black didn't really make too many missteps in order to have that happen. But basically, White's flank attack versus Black's flank attack, White's flank attack went much faster, and Black did speed it up a little bit with knight g4 forcing the trade on after knight e5. But either way, you were headed towards even with queen e6 or knight e4. White has played well and secured an initiative and basically a good opportunity to start attacking on the king side. Knight g4 really just expedites things for White. Overall, super interesting game. Yeah, great quick game. 20 or so move win. 25 I guess, but it's pretty much over by move 20 or 18 even. Yeah, awesome. Good tactical play and a good idea with knight e5 forcing that trade and the big space advantage on the light squared diagonal against h7. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Really interesting. Cool stuff. But yeah, thank you for sending it in, Aphelion. I appreciate you sending games in, and yeah, feel free to send them in the future. I'm always happy to look at them, and they're always interesting. Great win. Cool. So now Tarash has one. And let me just go back in the chat and pull it. Thank you for sending it. Yeah, it was really my mistake. I pulled the wrong link for Aphelion's game, but I'm glad we were able to get to both. Yeah, so let's take a look. Tarash was playing. Yeah. Okay. So cool. So Tarash is playing black in this game, and let's try to figure it out. Rui Lopez. It's a Rui Lopez game. The white wins, and Tarash is playing black. Okay. I'm just gonna go through really quick and just see what happened. Yeah, no, of course, Poundro. No, thank you very much for the for sending the game. I think it's probably gonna depending on how full the schedule is for tonight. It looks like I only have 3 games in for the schedule tonight. But I think Poundro, we're gonna get to that probably tonight at 6:05 or tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. But one of those 2 slots, I think it's pretty. I think unless there's a ton of Reddit comments, it's gonna be in either tonight's stream or tomorrow morning's stream. But thank you very much for sending it, Poundro, and I'm really happy to have you as a observer. And thank you for participating. But yeah, no, for sure. How about I'll whisper or no, you know what? Since you posted it on Reddit, I'll just DM you on Reddit after the stream to figure out whether it's going to be 6:05 or 10 a.m. But it's going to be one of those 2. So thank you very much for sending it, Poundro, and I appreciate you contributing to the stream. It works great when people are interested in sending games. So thank you very much for sending it. Yeah, no, I'll get back to you on the DM after the stream's over, and I'll have a chance to look at the schedule. But yeah, so Tarash sent this game, and I am curious. Interesting Rui Lopez game. Interesting. Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, no, for sure, Tarash. This looks like a good game where we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of the themes here. I play the Archangel, but this is the main line, Rui Lopez. So that's good. Bishop c5, castles, c3. So far so good. Main line Rui Lopez fairly equal. H6 is probably a little bit passive here. The main line here, by the way, is d6, which does allow bishop to d5 potentially, but that leads to a weakened pawn structure for white. It allows bishop to g5, which sets up which sets up some good strength from this pin on d8, and h6 is interesting. H6 is interesting, but not the most not the most popular move. But I think it's probably fine. It's just that d6, h6 is fine. d6 is the preferred. Martial attack is tactically complicated. There's some really beautiful games out of these super complicated. Basically out of these super complicated. Tactical openings. The Traxler's a very cool one. A lot of these very aggressive tactical openings lead to some crazy attacks where theory is explored. I don't know them super well. I always figured that growing up and improving at chess, I always basically figured that there would be an opportunity for basically for this, interesting. Cool. Yeah, that's cool, Philion. Yeah, martial attack is good. But the main point, the reason why I think it's awesome that you send them, and please keep sending these aggressive tactical lines are actually super good for me to learn, because my knowledge there is not so good. Growing up, I always figured that I had better tactical knowledge and worse book knowledge than my opponents. So I always steered away from so I always sort of steered away from these well-established aggressive tactical lines, because I figured my opponents would know them better than I would. So my knowledge in that theory is actually not very good at all. And it's awesome that I now have an opportunity to review games out of it and get to improve in those lines, like the Traxler line. I didn't even know that was a thing that existed, but it's very interesting. So yeah, please send those games. Like, if you wanted to send a martial attack game, that could be awesome instructional content that I would get a lot out of. But what I always did growing up was play fundamentally correct opening lines very aggressively. That was my strategy. But as a result, like martial attack, no, for sure, and we'll get to both. I'm more just sort of explaining my background in it. Like martial attack is cool. These openings are cool. So it's great. It's great to have an opportunity to look them over. So I guess I think the martial attack is a cool aggressive opening that offers a double-edged position that might be helpful to the person with good tactical execution or great book knowledge. Definitely, Aphelion. We'll take a look. Hey, thank you very much for the observe the reel. I appreciate it. Yeah, so that's what and thank you very much, CL Daz, for the observe. I did not know there was a 36 book move opening. That's pretty impressive, but cool. I didn't know that there was anything that extended. Yeah, no, the martial attack over the board is a rough position, and I've often wanted to steer clear of that. Awesome, thanks Dennis. Cool, I'll add that. I am kind of curious about that. I don't know if that's one you'd want reviewed, but I'll add it to my notes for the stream. But yeah, anyways, these aggressive opening lines are tricky. Queen e2, bishop a7, and here, yeah, okay, cool. But let's get back to this game. But my main point is that my knowledge of the martial attack is pretty unsophisticated, since I always sidestepped things like those as I was kind of trying to actively improve. Yeah, no, for sure, Tarash. And we've got a good solid few minutes to take a look at it. This is mainline Rui Lopez. H6 is a deviation, D6 is the main line, but H6 should also probably be okay. D4 is probably a play that white can make. D4 is complicated. D4 basically allows for a lot of pressure to be exerted on black. White has set up C3, or has set up D4 with C3. So here, I think D4, pawn takes D4, pawn takes D4, and white has a pretty strong center that's going to be difficult for black to exert too much pressure on. I mean, black can exert pressure, but is not going to successfully break through here. Bishop B6, I think, is the idea. D4, E5 leads to some good opportunities and a relatively restricted position for black. So this opportunity was kind of missed for white. It often is. D4 is often a resource that yeah, Jen is here. Jen is being a great super helpful in supporting the stream.
Hi.
But yeah, so D6.
Thank you for pointing out every time I walk by. I like it.
Yeah, no. So Jen is here. Knight G3, bishop to G4, and Jen's gonna be on the silly hat proposal. Yeah, but yeah, it's an idea. We'll have to think about that. Jen is great, and she's super helpful and supportive of the stream. So that's awesome. All right. Thanks for the thought, Aphelion. We'll figure that out. The idea is under review. But here, yeah, this ends up trading off into a favorable pawn center for black, or for white. Sorry, he ends up getting this extra pawn, and that ends up being a sufficient material advantage. But let's go back and let's look at black and white's winning strategies here. Here, H3, bishop H5. Yeah, so let's slow this down. Bishop G4 is interesting here. There's hey, what's up, Ahmet? How are you? Bishop G4, is a good play. But H3 and then bishop H5 I think is tactically unplayable. There's a tactic here that comes up a lot in Rui Lopez, and I've seen it elsewhere. But basically, this attack with a piece sacrifice and a discovery on the attack. So let's just see, knight takes H5, knight takes H5, and then knight to G5 here. Sometimes this comes as a discovery of the queen on the undefended piece on H5 as knight takes E5. But here, black has rook takes E5 as a resource, so that's not possible to be played. Here, knight takes H5, knight G5. And it still is a positionally. This doesn't win a pawn or a central pawn like that discovered attack on Queen H, of Queen H5 sometimes does. This instead offers an opportunity for knight to G5 to be played, and an opportunity to attack with and basically on pawn takes G5, queen takes H5. This is a real attack. I mean this. This bishop's focused on f7, and this pawn's focused on, and this bishop's focused on g5. The combination of those two is pretty dangerous for black. So it's a sacrifice that the white could potentially make here. Something to keep in mind, just in terms of making sure that you've defended h5 adequately. Yeah, I mean potentially. I guess I would say yes. Knight f6, bishop e3, queen a3. Yeah, no, I think big picture that's something that that you definitely have to keep that threat in mind. I wouldn't make the blanket statement bishop to h5 is bad. There's many positions in which it's playable, but this is in this particular one, this allows for some dangerous threats via discovery. So yeah, anyways, yeah, that's what I would say. Instructively, just keep it in mind. d6, rook e8, bishop g4. And that's a tactical error that black, the white doesn't capitalize on here, but provided white a tactically strong opportunity. And Jen walking out the door, but I don't know. She's probably getting breakfast. Yeah, Jen's the best. But yeah. So how does white win without attacking? That was an opportunity for white. Yeah, white is basically being relatively passive here. Bishop g4, h3, bishop h5. This line offers opportunities. I just want to make sure, because I would still say this is relatively close to equality. This game, considering that white didn't capitalize on that hanging or that positional that tactic to improve position and ultimately win either the G or F pawns. That provided some opportunities for black to equalize. D4 is strong here. You did the good Ruy Lopez maneuver with knight. So there's an opportunity here in a lot of Ruy Lopez lines to move c5 controlling d4, or basically actually it starts the move of 4. Knight a5, threatening to simplify with the bishop, then c5, then knight back to c6, making sure that white never establishes control of the d4 square, or has a lot of challenge going up against the d4 square. So that's a common theme. Here, in terms of finding an actual move, so e5 simplifies the center here. And it shifts the eval pretty significantly towards white. Let's figure out exactly why that is. What's the better opportunity here? I think rook. I mean, basically, this d6 pawn is in a lot of trouble. This d6 pawn is pretty much going to hang here. So I guess maybe queen c7 is black's best tactical resource, and then get rook to d8. White is effectively attacking your most your most effective your most vulnerable point, this hanging pawn on d6. So maybe bishop b3 is the next move. But you actually can, white is making this effective attack, but there is a tactical improvement on this defense, and it comes with this in-between move threatening this bishop on c2. White's traded into a complicated position. In general, this type of pawn structure, is one that offers a spatial advantage to the person with the more advanced pawn. I've talked a little bit about it as a general concept on the stream before, but when pawns are aligned like this, neither one of them can advance, right? The e4, if the black pawn advances, and this is in the absence of other pieces there. Interesting. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll take a look at the stream after and see if there's an issue here. But yeah. Basically, this rook e6 here is I think White's main conceptual idea that was good here was this attack on d6. So here queen c7, and then basically the in between move attacks c2. That's the valuable thing. This was a good idea to exert pressure on black's most vulnerable point, but this black has a tactical resource to hold on to this. So anyways, interesting. Yeah, no, I'll check it out. I'll check it out, CL Das. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm curious. Queen to c7 here, I think, is probably the the best play. Did you have chances in the endgame? Interesting question. So here's the final endgame here, right? Is basically, is this pawn able to provide an opportunity to either queen or to allow white to win an additional pawn and sort of advance the advance the attack? I guess we can count the tempos here. This is evaluated as equal. And rook and pawn endgames are technical and complicated, so I'm sure that I'm not going to do it justice here. F5, king e. Okay, so this allowed this defense allowed the white king to outflank the white king, or the black king. So with king to F5, this basically this king can provide effective support to this pawn. Specifically, say G5, king C5, rook C8, king D6, rook D8, king C7 is an inefficient way for black to play it, but one that very clearly illustrates the concept that that the white king has outflanked the black king. Here, this this leads to basically allowing the white king to e4 provides white with a win, is the most simplified way to say it. Here, it's a much more complicated problem. I'm looking at yeah, no. I'm not 100% sure about it, Tarash. The main point I don't really know, but this is a tactically complicated endgame where the computer has evaluated drawing chances. It's tough. These are tough and complicated endgames. Let's look at these. Let's look at the ideas here. This is in the book line that black draws. I'm a little surprised here that okay, so I guess the main point here is to get the black king behind the pawn. That's what it was. This was the the most important thing here. So king to e6 or king to d6 here solidifies the draw. There's still a slight engine calculation advantage, but yeah, that was the main motif here. I think is play the king to d6 to defend the d pawn. This is the way to go. Interesting. But yeah, so with the in-game issue, the king is able to advance on the c5 pawn, and particularly this this rook to e6. But overall, I think it's pretty good for black. It's overall pretty good for black in terms of drawing chances. The main tactical advance is king to d6 over king to f6. This prevents the white king from being able to get in there. It's interesting. I feel like getting a good I mean, I don't know. This was a bit of an error, I think. Just in terms of endgame, king f6. But anyways, interesting. Let's keep going. So here, d5, knight takes, queen takes, and this is the endgame. So this is the rook and pawn endgame that I think is the most instructive. But anyways, the bigger errors, the larger errors here is you had a tactical. White basically has a few tactical opportunities. This is the first. Knight to g5 looks pretty solid. Sort of curious about what happens if black just ignores it, and the answer is the threat on f7 is overwhelming. But that's that's a way to basically white missed that opportunity tactically. The next thing I think to look at is white effectively forces a threat on d6. That's that's pretty strong for white. So I'm thinking the tactical play is to secure this double attack on this bishop, and then follow it up with rook d8. From a tempo perspective, the bishop plays to b3, rook d8, and at the very least, it's going to take a few more moves for white to secure new resources on this hanging d6 pawn. But yeah, so I think that was the most. This is the place where I would allocate the most time to study. You have a tactical resource here. These in-between moves, can be tactical efficiencies that will save games for you. So queen c7, rook d8. So this is move 23, So here queen c7, and basically black is but black is at a disadvantage. The irony here is that ultimately this this end game ended up being drawish with this king to d6 tactical idea or resource. But the main thing that I think you can pretty clearly improve on is using this in-between move as a tactical resource for defense. Rook to d8, and the d6 pawn hangs on for at least a little bit longer. That said, this structure is consistently good for white. What I was sort of getting into it, but there's many cases in which you will have a e4 pawn against a d6 pawn or a d4 pawn against an e6 pawn, and the more advanced pawn has the spatial advantage. If there were no pieces there, if there were no pieces there, then basically there would be no opportunity for either side to improve. So just imagine a situation in which these two pawns were the only two pieces on the board. Neither could move forward because the other one would take it. So d5, pawn takes d5, or e5, pawn takes e5. Those two pawns are basically at a stalemate versus each other. So the improvement there is in so basically the side that has the more advanced pawn has the spatial advantage. Yeah, I mean I don't think with tactical errors I don't know if I can add that much. I mean the engine is better than I am, and it's better than everybody is at tactics. So the engine, I can come up and explain with it, explain some things, but the engine's better than all of us. So so that's the main point of this, is that the engine can do better than we can at any of the tactical stuff. The things that I can offer instructively are sort of along the lines of okay, in these types of games, sometimes there are opportunities where white has the ability to play discovered threats on h5. That's a common thematic idea. Knight g5, being strong here. But anyways, basically this discovered knight g5 or potentially knight takes e5. That's a common theme to the Ruy Lopez and a few other openings. So something that a pattern that you should definitely recognize, because I think practically it could be useful in your games. I think focusing on that and telling you to focus on that, I think is potentially instructive. But the tactics, I can say yeah, okay, queen c7 offers this cool in-between move and the ability to add another defensive tactical resource. But basically, at the end of the day, this this in-between move is mostly on they're tough to see, but with sufficient tactical training, I think you would see this counterattack. And it's cool to demonstrate that it can happen, but this pattern is something that you would become more and more able to see through tactical study. Yeah, I think that's right, Tarash. More tactical study for all of us. But this would be like an instructive example where like, you know, really coming up with a good tactical idea is enough to save the weakest point here. But anyways, yeah, super interesting, super good game. But those are the points that there are three instructive things I think. Keep in mind the potential for a knight discovery on a hanging piece here, here you have a tactical improvement with a double attack. And then the final one is I think this draw could have been secured with king in front of the pawn in a king, rook, and pawn endgame. I think the combination of those three are somewhat helpful. But yeah, anyways, just a very interesting game. Sorry it was a difficult one, but yeah, no, thank you guys very much for sending these games, and hopefully the instruction's helpful. But it's certainly helpful to me. I get to learn a lot about you know, some of the more instructive concepts, and it's helpful for me to reinforce them to myself as well. Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Tarash. This is yeah, this is very interesting. Thanks all for sending games in this session. Thanks for Aphelion on being patient for me pulling the wrong game initially. And yeah, I appreciate having you guys all here. The next stream is at 6:05 p.m. Eastern tonight, and yeah, we have a lot of games coming in from Reddit. And I'll keep everyone posted on the slot in which their game gets assigned. But thank you all very much for posting posting all the games. It's great, and it really helps the stream. So yeah, thank you all very much. Have a good one, guys. See you back at 6:05 p.m. Eastern tonight. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye.